Good morning, Bucket Pond friends, and hello. Today we are collecting from the wilds of southern Georgia, specifically off the side of a road near Stockton, Georgia, a nice little country area. This field here has been cleared presumably for agriculture, and I see some very interesting water bodies, but it's private land, and even though they don't have any fences, I can't really go over there and intrude on their property. Maybe one day we'll figure out who owns the place and make friends with them, but instead we're going to collect from right here. This is a roadside ditch, and anyone can access this. This is public property, public land, and that's good for us, you know. So we're going to explore this beautiful ditch and check out some of these plants. It's actually a very scenic location. I did pick up most of the trash and debris so that you guys wouldn't have to see that, but I missed some apparently. But I did my little community service, my good deed for the day, and it really is a nice location, even if it is just a roadside ditch. I have my collection kit here, which is basically a lunchbox with a few jars inside and some other little trinkets. And we're looking for anything that might seem interesting. We've had a lot of luck last year with our collection trips, and this year as well. So we're going to set our jar right here, and right away I see some very interesting moss down here. It's bright green, and it's right there at the water line. It's very chunky and thick, very wet, and it seems to be thriving. So that shows me that this may be a great Terrarium species, or even a semi-aquatic moss that we can use in our projects. So I'll take some of that moss, but I'm also going to get some of the substrate here, some of the mud, and some of this water. Now, this is technically a vernal pool. It's not a permanent pond, so we might find different things. We might not find much in here at all. But I've already found this moss, so I'm happy. We will try to collect one of those grass plants, and looking over here, I happen to find some spike rush. You guys have seen this in some of my recent collection videos. It's not hard to find in this part of the country. It may be a related species or the same species that we grow at home. And here's one of our grass plants. I did manage to collect one. I tried to get the roots intact, and they kind of formed a little ball. And we're just going to scoop up some water. This grass was growing in the water, excuse me. I have a pine needle on the camera. There we go. And that looks really cool sticking out of the jar, but I'll have to plant that somewhere eventually. It might do well in the pool ponds. And we have a nice handful of that moss. There's tons of it out here, so I'm going to take a little extra. This looks really good. So hightailing it back to headquarters, and here we are. There's our moss that we collected. It's very interesting. All of my identification apps registered this as a type of sphagnum moss, but it says that about every moss that I've tried to identify through those apps. So yeah, species unknown. Maybe you guys might recognize it. I really cannot identify moss. It's something about it. But the Latin name doesn't matter to me at all. I'm not going to look up for a care sheet or how to grow this or anything like that. I'm just going to throw it into the projects that I build. And if it succeeds, then it's perfect. And if it doesn't, oh well. We'll find something else that will work for us. And here in the aquatic samples, we do have that grass plant. I will have to remove it from the jar eventually. And I was hoping to find more microfauana, but I don't see much action in here. Just a few Copepods. And they're kind of old news for us at this point. I love them. They're very cool. But yeah, we'll have to set these jars aside. I'll feed them and nurture them and keep them warm. And hopefully some interesting microfauna will begin to reproduce in here. But for today, I think we're going to focus on this new moss. I'm always excited when I find a new type of moss, and I'm always curious to see what we can do with it. I've tested many different types in aquatic situations, like literally in a jar of water. I hope I used literally right there. Probably not. But in my experience, the different types of mosses, I guess, that have a vertical structure seem to do better underwater. So this moss fits that description. And yeah, we're going to build a terrarium today. Yeah, I'm going to use one of my old rectangular jars turned on its side. And we're going to build a nice terrarium. So we're adding a bit of substrate here. I'm just using some rocks to kind of build up a foundation. It's a lava rock and a little bit of marble. Just what I had on hand here. I'm also going to throw in a little bit of gravel that I just happen to have laying around. That's perfect. And I've added some backyard soil and Spanish moss on top of that. Just to add some texture. It was actually really hard to get it into the sideways jar, so I did that off camera. I hope you can forgive me. The Spanish moss is in there to add a bit of like air pockets to the soil and to hopefully help soak up water and stuff. That Spanish moss will not survive in a tank like this, but I just happen to have some hanging around in the fish room, so it's perfect. Spanish moss, I don't think it's really a moss at all. I think it's more of a true plant. I don't really know. We're using some of our aquascaping tools here just to get the moss firmly, pushed down into the substrate just a bit. And I probably did not need this dirt at all. As far as I know, most moss actually takes their nutrients from the air, which is crazy. Though I'm sure there are exceptions and interesting things that it can do. But yeah, this moss, I assume, would function a bit like that. So we don't really need a fertile substrate in here. I probably could have used sand or something. But yeah, I just happen to like this soil. This is our backyard compost made from oak leaves and some sweet gum leaves and things like that. And now I'm just packing the moss in there ever so gently. And we are going to scape this a little bit. I want to say aquascaping, but it's not really aquascaping, so terrascaping, I don't know. But there's a better view. And this moss is really cool. It kind of has like a star, chaotic star type shape. I don't know how to describe it. And you might see these pink stones laying here. I actually dug these out of some old aquarium gravel. I think it's some type of quartz, like a pink quartz or something. It's really beautiful though. And I did not know that this was even in that gravel. That was given to me by a family member. And I just want to say thank you. It's beautiful. So we're going to add those stones here in the middle and try to create something that will add a bit of depth to the project. I want it to look like it's deeper than it really is. I want it to look like it's larger, if that makes sense. I want to add a bit of illusion here. And really what I should do is use the larger stones in the foreground and the smaller stones in the background, but I'm not that fancy yet. I'm still getting into terrarium stuff, I am wearing my gloves because sometimes when you work with these wild soil samples and wild moss and stuff, you might pick up parasitic worms, excuse me. Who knows? There could be anything in these wild samples, so the gloves are probably a good idea. I am going to be switching to some black gloves in the future once I run out of the ones that I have currently. I think they'll just look cooler on the channel, and I do get the gloves dirty a little bit as we film, so you won't see them so much if it's a black glove. But there we go. We've made a simple little pathway in here, and I think it looks kind of cool. And we're going to add a little bit of wood as a background. This wood came from a tree that fell in the oasis, and it feels really good to, even though it crushed some of my projects, it feels really good to include it in our projects. I'll save this piece of moss for future use, and yeah, there we go. Now, a lot of YouTubers out there, a lot of people who make terrariums, they might do things differently. They might start with all of their special stuff in there, all their plants and whatnot, this species, that species, and so on. But I don't really do that. I'm a chaotic individual. I like to just throw some wild stuff together, or some of my own moss, and see what develops and see what happens. I think that's really fun. So we are going to add a lid here. It's a very simple lid. It's just a bit of our non-biodegradable screen mesh. The same stuff I've used in the closed ecosystems and all sorts of stuff. And we're going to use a rubber band. There we go. Now, it's a little finicky to get this on there. But this is the cheapest lid that you can get for any jar. I guarantee it. Yeah, these materials here cost less than $1 if you were to piece it out a little bit. I have a giant roll of screen, and I've been using it for years. I just take a little bit here and there. And the rubber bands are a new addition to our tools, but they're very effective. I used to use zip ties and things like that, but the zip ties are not, they're single use, you know, they're kind of wasteful. This rubber band will last a long time, and it's perfect. That screen mesh will allow ventilation, air to travel in and out of the terrarium, and it will also prevent any gnats or things. You know, when you're working with wild samples like this, you might collect some insect larvae or who knows, you know, it could be anything. So I would not be surprised if we see some gnats or something that develop in here in time, and that's fine. Generally with a wild build like this, I will keep it closed so that any insects or whatever that pop out of here cannot escape. And if they do happen to get out, the fish room frogs will eat them. Yes. The YouTube members will know that we have a ton of frogs that live in the fish room, and they eat anything they can find. Not intentionally. My window is all screwed up. It's a long story. But yeah. So we kind of have some pet frogs that will happily eat any flying insects that might escape. Otherwise, I would keep a jar like this closed and allow those insects, mosquitoes or whatever, to, you know, emerge and die before I open it. And here we are 7 days later, under 24-hour lighting, and it's beautiful. Yeah, it's developed quite nicely. It's a little bit dry. Unfortunately, I will have to wet it some more. But we have some interesting plant growth here. I think that might be an oak tree. I'm not quite sure. But some of the moss has shot up some structures. The name escapes me, but I believe the moss uses those structures to spread spores for reproduction or propagation, depending on how you want to look at it. But yeah, it's really cool. Now, I chose this particular jar and used it sideways for a reason, because I have a horrible urge to flood all of my terrariums and add microfauna and turn them into nano tanks, nano aquariums. So by using a sideways jar like this, I can only add so much water. Really, it's whatever can be soaked up by that soil. So it kind of limits it a little bit. It prevents me from flooding it out because the water will just run out of the lid there. So yeah, it does mean that I have to mist it more often. And I did just recently start a new job, a whole new company, and then a whole new position after a couple months. So I am, strapped for time a little bit. So I don't want to have too many projects that I have to mist and, maintain. I have a lot of jar aquariums, you guys. I have like 30 different jars running right now. And it's crazy. I don't advise you do that. Don't do that. Just have one or two. But here's our terrarium, and I'm going to clean it up a little bit. So I just have a paper towel on my tweezers here. Typically, with a project like this, I expect to, use one or two paper towels. One during setup, so you can wipe things down and keep it clean, and then one, when you're maintaining the tank. And I try not to be wasteful. I can use this same towel for, several other projects. I'm not too worried about cross-contamination, which is some things that, people in this hobby and the aquarium hobby might worry about. But for me, I purposely cross-contaminate all of my tanks, and then it's not a problem. Then I don't have to worry anymore. The only thing I'm wary of are the snail leeches, because if they get into my main snail populations, they might cause problems. But that's kind of off topic for right now. I'm really happy to use that piece of wood in here, even though it did crush some of my projects outside. Trees fell on the oasis during the hurricane. We had Hurricane Helene, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's kind of sweet revenge to use that piece of that tree in this build. The circle of life, yeah. It's like, yes, you crushed some of my projects, but now you are one of my projects. So yeah, that's kind of fun, right? And here's a look at the inside of the terrarium through the doorway or the mouth of the jar. And I think it looks really cool. Looks better from the front, but this does give you a good idea of exactly what we're dealing with in here. I love that stone. The stone and the wood really set this off. In time, that moss should begin to cover most of the surfaces in here, hopefully. And we shouldn't see any of the soil after a while. So it'll be green, pink, and brown. And I think that'll be a very, very interesting terrarium for the future. I should mention, you guys, that I got an invite to collect on a 100+ acre wooded farmland, former farmland, now basically a forest. And a friend of mine said that we could come out there and do a little collection video. I'm very excited. We're going to do that soon. The weather's warming up and everything looks good. It's about the right time to have some fun and do a little exploring. I did have to make one concession, though. I have to build them a terrarium. I don't have to, but they gave me a jar, and I want to kind of consider that like a trade. You know, you let me take a little bit of moss from your land, and I'll build you a terrarium to give you in exchange. I think that's kind of cool, right? And one last thing, you guys. About 8 days ago, I did put a piece of that moss underwater here in Tails' aquarium. Tails, the two-tailed bladder snail, who's doing quite well. His tank has a little bit of an algae issue right now, but that's okay. But yes, that moss has been living underwater for about 8 days now, and that shows me that it just might be able to survive fully submerged. I'm very excited. There's a brief look at my setup as well, the shelving and whatnot. Just want to say thank you to our YouTube members. You guys are awesome. And thank you for everyone else watching. I know this video is a little different, but we built a cool terrarium. We found some new species of moss, and we have a lot of ideas for the future. So let's hope it works out. I'll see you guys again soon.